Okay, so in this video, we'll be creating data validation lists like this, so you can have like multiple options for users to select from, and if they try to type something else, they're gonna get an error message, something like that. And then by the end of the video, we will also create dependent drop-down validation when you select one option here in the left column, and then it will give you only options depending on what's selected here. So if it's United States, I'm gonna see only cities from the United States, and if I choose Spain, I'm gonna only get options from there. And so it's gonna work like that, and this is gonna work like this for the entire column. So same thing here, see, and so on. So I'm gonna start with the basic drop down. So let's create a basic yes no drop down here first. So to create a drop down, you go under data tab right here on top, and you find data validation. So here we're gonna go data validation again, and then instead of any value, we're gonna switch to list, and then we can provide our comma separated list, something like yes, comma, and no. So I'm gonna hit OK. So now we should have a drop down here, see, with those two options, yes or no. If we try to enter maybe, we get an error message because that's not a valid entry for this field. So it's gonna restrict and not let any other item be entered in this field. Now, if you wanted to do this for the whole column, I'm gonna undo this. So let's say we have a column in our data, finished, and then this should be yes or no. So you can highlight a lot of cells, go under data, data validation, and then switch to list, and then again, yes, comma, no. And now we have our little drop downs in this entire column. Now, sometimes when you create this data validation list, you will have a lot of different options, or you might have options where you have commas in your options. So when you try to do this with comma separated list, what's gonna happen is every comma is gonna be a new option. So for example, if I try to do Chicago, Illinois, well, it's gonna think Chicago is one of the options, and then the comma separates the next option, right? So to get around that, we're gonna have to start using range in Excel. So what I'm gonna do to keep this clean, I'm gonna create a new tab. In this tab, I'm gonna type a list of my options. So I'll do something like Chicago, Illinois, Los Angeles, California, New York City, New York. So 3 options. I'm gonna call this options. So now what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna go to this tab, and this is gonna be location. So what we do, again, if it's one cell, you select one cell. You can also select from this cell all the way down. Just make sure you don't select the entire column, because this cell is the label, right? So we want to start from here and down. So Control Shift down. So for me, I'm just gonna select this range right here. I'm gonna go under data, data validation, and then this is a list. And this time as a source, I'm going to click in this box. I'm going to go to my options tab and select this range of values. So I'm going to hit enter, and I'm going to click OK. And now I should have my drop down with a list of options from the other list. And if we change the list in some way, something like this, that should be reflected in our drop down now. So now we have those options. And again, if you try to do something else, it's just gonna give you this error message. Now, when you do this, you might want to have something where you can add more items to this list and it will automatically work. So as of right now, if I try to add a new location, and I go here and create a new location, if I go back here, it's just not gonna add it to the list, because it's still gonna refer to that original range, which does not include this new item in it. At this point, you'll have to go to your data validation and basically reassign the range to make sure it's correct. Or your number option 2 is to use a function called offset. So offset is a pretty complicated function, so I'm not really going to go a lot into detail about how it works. Just to give you an overall idea, if I did like offset here, so offset has a starting point, so I'm going to start from this beginning point, comma, and then the number of rows you want to offset from this position. So you can think about this like X and Y offset. So the number of rows I want to offset. So if I do 0, it's going to stay in the current cell, comma, and then number of columns you want to offset. So 0, again, it will stay in the current cell. So if I close this, that would pretty much be the current cell. Now, if I do offset 1 row, it will move 1 down. So that's going to get us to Los Angeles, right? And if I do 2 rows, it's going to go to Miami. So now that's offset 2. And if I do 1 here, then it's going to go offset like this way. It's going to go over here someplace, which there's nothing in that cell. So now for me, I'm just going to use this offset 0, 0 to not offset anything. I'm just going to stay in this first cell, but it also has this optional height arguments. So right now it's 1, 2, 3, 4. There are 4 items, so it's going to be 4. By doing that, I'm basically creating 4 rows in this. So if I hit enter, see, I'm still going to get that 1 because we can't really output 4 things in a single cell. But if I just evaluate this to see what's in there, I'm going to highlight this and press F9. You'll see that what I get is a list of those 4. So I'm going to undo, Control Z to get that. So that's that list of that 4. But what we need to do, this 4 needs to change as our values change. So if we add another city, that should now get to 5. And then if we remove 1, it should get to 4 and so on. So what we can do to do that, instead of hard coding 4 in this formula, we can use a function COUNTA. And COUNTA basically just gives you a count of non-blank cells. So if I highlight this entire column, I close parentheses, right? Hit enter, and that's going to give me 4 because there are 4 items. And if I add another item, it's going to give me 5. So it will count how many things we have and it will update. So at this point, I can take this COUNTA function, I can copy that, escape, and go back, and instead of this 4, I can paste that COUNTA function to dynamically add that number in there. So if I delete this, so if I go back here and check what's inside of this, F9, see I get the list of my cities here. I'm going to hit escape to not change that. And then if I add another city, if I go back here and check what happened, see now Houston is included in our results. So offset function returns an array, and we should be able to use that array in our data validation. Now, this offset function on this tab isn't going to work. I have to build the same from the other tab where my data validation is going to actually be. So I'm going to go here, and first I'm going to just build that offset function. So I'll just click here in the cell, equals offset. Now I have to go to my options tab. This is my range reference, A1. I'm going to do comma, and then number of rows offset 0, comma. So again, watch the formula bar to see this formula. Columns 0, comma, and then the height. So it's going to be COUNTA function, and it's going to be this entire column. I'm going to close parentheses for COUNTA function, and then close parentheses for offset function, and that should build my formula. So now if I just check with F9 what's in here, that should be the range. I'm going to do Control Z. Now to make this work, when I start dragging this formula down, I need to lock my ranges. So F4 for this A1, and also F4 for this range here. So that's going to lock this. I'm going to hit enter. So now this formula should work in our data validation. So I'm going to copy that entire thing, hit escape. I'm going to select this range, go under data again, data validation. Yeah, sure. We're going to change that. And under list, I'm going to use a source, and the source is going to be that offset formula. So I'm going to hit OK. And now let's see what happens, right? So we got our 5 cities in this list of our data validation. Now, if I go back and remove Houston from this list, I go back here, we should see that's not in our list, right? So let's put Houston back. And let's try to add something else. We'll do San Francisco. So now if I go back and I check this, see, it automatically expands. And I don't need this anymore. This should work without it, right? So the formula is still sitting in the data validation. So that should work just fine. Now let's get to a little more complicated case. So let's say we have, instead of location, I'm going to delete this column. I have something like country, and I have city. I want to have a drop down here that will be different countries. And when we select one, we want to have only cities from that country available in this drop down on the right. So to do this, I'm going to delete that. Let's first of all create a list of countries. So I'm going to say US, UK, and we'll do something like Spain. So you could do it this way, but I'm going to do it this way. You'll see why in a little bit. So now to have a validation list between these 3, that's going to be easy. We're going to go under country, select the range, data validation. It's going to be a list, and the source is going to be these countries. So enter, okay. So now we should have a list of those countries. Now the way this should work is when I select the US here, it should just give me cities from this country. And if we switch to the UK, we should get cities from here and so on, right? So hopefully that makes sense to you. Now let's see how this is going to work. So to understand how this works, there are 2 things you need to know about. One is something that's called named range, and the second thing is indirect function. So named range is actually pretty easy to understand. So let me just go over it really quickly so you can see what named range is. So let's say I have 3 numbers here, and we want to sum this up. So we go and do equal sum, and we select this range. Close parentheses, hit enter. That gives us the total. Now another way to do this is using a named range. So if I highlight all of these numbers, I can go to this name box right here. This thing that says A4 here is called a name box. I'm going to click there, and I'm going to give this a name. I'm going to call it numbers, hit enter. And now this range has a name. See, if I click on this drop down, it shows up. So now I should be able to go and do sum and type numbers and hit enter, and it should just give me the total. Named range will work if I go to a different tab as well. So if I go here and do equal sum numbers again, close parentheses, see, I'm getting the same results. So that's how named ranges work. So basically we can name a range and then we can refer to that particular name and use it in our formulas and functions. Now the second function that you need to know for this is a function called indirect. Now, first of all, let me just type some cities here. Okay, so that should do it. So now let's talk about indirect functions. So indirect function is a function that will let you use text as a range. So let me go to that example again. Let's just type 3 numbers like this. And now if you want to sum up these numbers, you just say sum of these, you hit enter, right? Now, what if I want to pass this A7 through A9 not as a range, but as text? So if I put this in quotes, which will make it text, I hit enter, I'm going to get an error because this is not a valid range. This is just text. So to make Excel work with this text as a range, I can put that text inside of a function called indirect, like this. And now because this text is inside of indirect function, it's going to take that text and try to make it a valid range if one exists, and then do the sum. So if I hit enter, that gives me the total. This means that we could also go and type A7 through A9. I'm gonna hit escape, go here and paste. That's just text, A7 through A9. And then in my function here, I can just refer to that text like this, and it will give me the same total. Now, which means we can also take this and name this range. So I'm going to go under this name box again. So see, numbers doesn't match. So let's give it a different name now. So I'm going to do this nums. Hit enter to make it a range here. So now I have 2 numbers is that, and nums is this. So now if I simply just type nums here, indirect is going to refer to that cell that says nums, and it's going to be converted to a range. And because there is a named range like that, it's just going to work and sum it up. Now, the same thing we're going to use for our dropdown. So first, I'm going to delete this named ranges to keep this clean. So to find your named ranges, you have to go under Formulas tab here on top. And then there is this thing called Name Manager right here in the middle. So you click on it, you'll see all of these. I'm going to just delete those. Get rid of those named ranges. So then I'm going to just name all these ranges of different cities with the same name of the country on top. So I'm going to select this, go on top, A2, name it US, and then select this, that's UK. This should be Spain. Which means if I do indirect Spain and click on this text Spain, if I just evaluate this with F9, see, it just gives me the city here. The same way if I do A1, which is US, if I do F9 for evaluation, you'll see it just gives me the range of cities. Gonna hit escape. So now what we're going to do, we're going to go to this tab. And if I did something next to this UK, if I did an indirect function and point to that UK is one of our named ranges, right? So if I evaluate that, see, that gives me 2 options. If I switch this to US, so if I just evaluate this, see, I get list of cities from the US. Now it's still gonna just output the first one because it cannot put all the cities in a single cell. Now what I'm gonna do, I'm just gonna cut that formula. I'm gonna select this range for cities. I'm gonna go here on top and data validation, and we're gonna select list. And then as a source, I'm going to simply paste that indirect function. So I'm gonna hit OK. So now let's check what happens. So here, see, we have a list of cities. That makes sense. Here, we get nothing because there's no selection. So let me go here and select UK. Now I try that. See, I'm getting cities from United Kingdom. Now I go here and select Spain, Barcelona, So it's US, so UK, it's gonna give me options from here. Makes sense. So US, I'm gonna get only US cities. And that's how we can use indirect. Now there is only one problem with this, is that when you name a range, you cannot name a range that has a space in its name. So for example, if we have 30, 40, and 50, if I decide, let's name this some numbers, see, with a space, I hit enter, I get an error. What that means, if the country is more than a single word, then we cannot now refer to country. Now it's going to be United States, but here there is no match because the named range, I cannot name it United States with a space. So let's see how we can go around this. So to do this, what I'm going to do when I name the range, like this range, instead of calling it US, I'm going to call it United_States. So basically, instead of the space, I'm going to use an underscore. I'm going to hit enter, and now we should have a named range, see, with an underscore in it. So I'm going to undo that step. And what I'm going to do first, I'm going to delete all the named ranges we already have. So I'm going to delete that, delete this, and I'm going to do this because I want to show you another feature in Excel. I'm going to simply just select this, and I'm going to go here under formulas, and there's this create from selection. I'm going to click on that, and it says, what do you want to use a name for this named range? And I'm going to say top row. That's perfect. I'm going to hit OK. And because it knows that it cannot use a space, see, if I check here, see, it converted that space to an underscore automatically. So that's good. I'm going to now select this one, create from selection. Same for this. So now I should have 3 named ranges. See, Spain, United Kingdom, and United States. So now that we have those, I need to somehow create, remember that indirect function, to select those named ranges. Now again, the problem is, if I try, first of all, let me clear this data validation. I'm going to go under data and data validation, and I'm going to say clear all. And that's how you remove data validation, by the way. So now if I do indirect and I refer to this cell, well, that's not a valid range. So if you remember, our named range is called United_States. So what I'm going to do for that, I'm going to use a function called substitute. Substitute, I'm going to point to this United States text, comma, and then the old text I'm looking for is a space. So because in formulas in Excel, you have to put your text in quotes, it's going to be quote space quote. So we're looking for a space, and we're replacing that with an underscore. So again, in quotes, underscore, close parentheses, hit enter. So what this is going to do is going to just replace, see, that with an underscore. And if I switch to United Kingdom, that's underscore for this. And Spain, well, there are no underscores. So see, that one works automatically here. But now what I'm going to do, I'm going to take that substitute function. I'm going to copy that without the equal sign. And that gives me that text with underscore, right? And I'm going to replace this reference inside of indirect with that substitute function. So if I enter, now I have something that will convert that with underscore and use the name. So I'm going to copy that entire thing. I'm going to delete it from here. And then I'm going to select this data validation range, data validation, and we're going to do a list. And I'm going to paste that as a source for this range. I'm going to hit OK. So now let's see what happens. United States, we have our cities. I switch it to United Kingdom. We have it working like it should. Switch it to Spain. No problem. United States. No problem.